how's it going? I'm Casey Martin from Wine Country Pens and Wine Country Woodworks, and this is going to be a video of me telling you guys all the things that I wish I knew before I started resin casting. And another way to say this is kind of the mistakes I made from trying and failing, and hopefully this is a list of things that can help anybody who is trying to get into resin casting themselves to avoid them and not make the same mistakes that I did and learn the hard way. So I have a list on my phone and I'll just get right into it and start talking about them. And the first one is regarding color swirls, and it's that color swirls are best when the resin is closest to curing. That means that they're going to bleed less when the resin starts to get warm and it's closer to it's towards the end of its open time, if that makes sense. So basically, you know, Alumilite clear, the normal version of it, has a 7-minute opening time. If you're pouring in your resin at 6 minutes, that is about the best time to be doing the color swirls. If you mix your resin really quickly and you're doing, let's say, a red and a blue color swirl, and you pour it in right at the beginning, you're much more likely to get some swirls that bleed together and become purple than if you do that at 6 minutes or 6 minutes and 30 seconds, if you can even push it that far. So that's one of the things that I learned the hard way. It's not the biggest deal if it happens, and sometimes it can even look cool, like the blue and white swirls that I make a lot, that kind of makes a lighter blue. But with the colors like blue and red or green and yellow, then you'll actually get other colors with the swirls, not just different variations of the current colors. So the next thing is about wood stabilization in regards to casting them. So if a wood isn't completely stabilized or just not stabilized at all, and the wood is slightly porous, like this will happen with some maple burls, some buckeye burls, then alumalite resin will get inside of the pores, almost like a stabilization process, but it does not look that good if the dye or the resin is colored with a dye. For example, I might be able to put some pictures up down in the description if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, but basically, like with a maple burl with blue resin, all of these little pores will pop up with blue specks, and it can look cool sometimes, but for the most part it's not what people are going for. And if you are trying to go for that look, most people just dye stabilize the wood. So anyway, that's something that I had an issue with a few times, and the simple fix is either to stabilize it or use a color that's not super dark. Like if you use a slightly transparent resin color or just clear resin, of course you wouldn't have that problem, because not all woods need to be stabilized, and that's the reason why, or stabilized prior to casting I should say, and that's the reason why I encountered this mistake. So anyway, without further going on about that one, hopefully that's something that can help people in the future. And another thing, it's almost more of a tip, but it's something that I learned, is that you can cast alumalite onto already cured alumalite. So a perfect example of this that I've done a few times, but I only do with solid color casting, is with my pen blanks. So the example I'll run you guys through is if I'm casting like red grapevine pen blanks, and when I take it out of the pressure pot and I unmold it and I realize instead of being 3/4 of an inch thick, it's slightly below that. So what I'll do is I will pour more alumalite on top of that. But the most important thing that I wanted to let you guys know that I learned the hard way is you need to take some sandpaper or some form of abrasive and scratch up the parts of that cast that are just pure alumalite, because otherwise the alumalite won't adhere that well. So hopefully that's something that you guys can, you know, use to your advantage in the future, because there have been, the first time I did that, it was making just pen blanks for myself, and I didn't do the sanding method, and I put it on the lathe and the thing just peeled off. It didn't pop off, but like it was not adhering that well. But as soon as I did the sandpaper trick that I actually learned from Higgins, I have not had that issue since. So moving on to the next thing is, and I touched on this in my Alumilite Best Tips video that I learned, so check that out if you guys are interested in more things, but I didn't want to overlap anything. And this is making mold racks out of HDPE. I do have a mold rack made out of melamine right here that I can show you guys, this one, but as you can see, or as I've talked about before, melamine is not as good as HDPE when it comes to anything Alumilite related. So what I have done here is I've made a mold rack out of HDPE. If anybody wants a video on how to make one of these, let me know. It's pretty straightforward, but I can definitely make one if you guys are interested. And it's just, I started out with wood the very first time, and then melamine after that, and then I finally just broke down and used some of the HDPE I had lying around to make a mold rack, and it has just been so nice. Nothing sticks to it. If something does spill out onto it, it just pops right off as soon as I apply some pressure. So that's something that wasn't really a mistake I made, but I just didn't do it the right way for a long time, and I highly recommend anybody making a mold rack for the first time to just take that leap. Even though it seems weird and you'd want to use wood or something else, HDPE is really strong, and it's going to save you a lot of time in the future if you're casting a lot like I am. So moving on to the next thing is regarding resin and translucence, or transparency, you want to call it that, or how opaque it is. And the tip or the thing that I've learned is a resin is not always opaque just based on what it looks like in the cup when you're mixing it or when you pour it into a mold. So where I'm going with that is when you look at it in a cup or the mold, it might look like a solid color and it might look like there's no transparency at all, but as soon as you cut it into a blank, then you can start to see, oh, it's kind of see-through, and then as soon as you turn it into a pen, you're like, crap, this is super see-through, and I wasn't anticipating this, and I didn't paint the brass tube, anything like that. So the best way I found to kind of gauge for that is when you are mixing it and you kind of get a little bit of resin popping up on the top or like around the sides that's not at the bottom of the cup but kind of on the top, that's the thinnest viscosity, or like the thinnest piece of resin you'll be able to see before it cures. And if it looks transparent there, then you know it's going to be transparent on like the ends of a pen when it's turned that thin when it's cured. So that's the best tip. I mean, it's going to be really hard with that method to see if it's opaque super thinly, because almost anything is going to be transparent when it's, you know, like a millimeter or so, but it will definitely give you a gauge, because if it looks almost like clear Alumilite, then you know that you definitely should be adding more dye. And that kind of moves on to one of my next things that I've learned, which is if you're using pearlescent powders and no dye whatsoever, you're probably going to run into the issue that I was just talking about, where it's going to look like a solid color, but it's going to be transparent. And I just want to preface, or not preface, but say about everything I've been talking about with transparency, it's not a problem. I love transparency in a lot of the cool hybrid blanks I make. Like this one, for example, if you guys can see, it's really cool. It's just something that I have done without intending to, and it's created a problem. So it's something just to know and be able to account for or use to your advantage, like I have as well. So if you are using pearlescent powders, just make sure you add some dye if you're not going for the transparency look, because there are maybe some powders, although there's none that I've dealt with that can completely avoid transparency, but that's, at least with Pearlex powders, what I have experienced. And the last one is, it's kind of just something that I thought would be funny to mention and is important to bring up, I think, is that resin will not come out of clothes. There's definitely been a couple shirts that I've got Alumilite on, and once it cures, it is not coming out. And that's kind of obvious, but I wanted to say it anyway. And then just to kind of go hand in hand with that, it will wash off of skin, of course, and your hands, so don't worry about that. But I really hope this video shared some insight into things that can help you guys avoid problems in the future, or just use these tips to your advantage. So I really hope these things that I learned and wish I knew before are able to help you guys. So like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, no hard feelings, and I look forward to the next video. Everyone, comment down below what you thought, and take it easy.